And thank you all for coming out this evening. And this has been a very, very exciting time, I know, building up to this. I'm just going to talk just briefly, and I'll be here for questions. And what Warren wants to do is interact with the audience and get questions and so forth as we go through. But as you know, and may not know, how many know about the National Memorial Military Ascent in Grafton that we're building? Okay, it's going to be a representation of the Rangers climbing Pointe du Hoc during World War II on Omaha Beach on D-Day. We're going to have 12 life-size bronze statues of Rangers that'll be climbing the cliff with the ancillary support positions below, German position up on the top. And one of those is going to be a radio man, which is going to represent a code talker, which we'll talk about tonight. Now, the code talkers were not at the Pointe du Hoc, but they were on Omaha, and I'm not going to steal Warren's thunder. He'll go through all of that. So we just finished up having the Foundry in North Carolina out here the first week in June, and they came out and they did the live scanning of all the live models that were going to be posing for the cliff, all 12 statues, to include the radio man. And the radio man is going to be the first one that they do, and they're going to ship it out to us so we can take it places and use it for talks. So we had those scanned. We had we had the 2nd Ranger Battalion of St. Louis come out. They dressed everybody in period uniforms. We got those young men that were 19, 20 years old to model, and it was a wonderful week-long period. They've taken that data back to North Carolina. They've been looking at it in the computers. They've put it up. They think that they've got everything the way they want it. Once it is, they'll send it to Portland, Oregon. Portland, Oregon runs it through a 3D printer to make 3D printing castings. Now, I don't know how that works. But what they're saying is they get those sections in and they'll ship it back out to North Carolina, and they'll start the process of assembling those and doing the pouring of the bronze. So we're very excited about this. This is moving forward, and we'll talk more. If you have questions, we can, but we've also given out a lot of these flyers tonight. Pick one of these up on your way out. It explains it, and we've got other things. So without further ado, and I got to tell you, the Warren's had a rough couple of days because he came up out of Guadalajara, Mexico, and he was in Atlanta for 2 days. And through the grace of God and the Creator, we got him in today. He came in this morning. Mary we were on pins and needles whether this would be going tonight. This is his first live event, and he should have had a day of rest, but he didn't. So I'm going to let Warren introduce himself. His bio is very long, and we'll be both here for questions throughout the evening. So Warren?
Thank you, Mike. This is indeed a great honor, and I do apologize for not being more formally attired. But thanks to Delta, I lost a couple of days of my life. Fortunately, I didn't have to sleep at the motel. But it was so pathetic to see probably a couple thousand families, people sleeping at 3 o'clock in the morning in the concourses and so forth with their little kids. And the feeling that, oh my God, how am I going to get home or go where I need to go to? I can't get any answers from anybody. All the hotels in Atlanta are full, and on and on and on. And I said, "Why? It feels like helplessness. There's a terrible sinking feeling." And you kind of say, "Oh, how these poor little kids are going to take this." You know, they're going to see grandma, grandpa, or something, but they're living in a dark, cold place. Anyway, that's my my whimpering about my experience. My name is Warren Gohl, G-O-H-L. I am maternally descended from Comstock, chief of the Seneca Cayuga tribe at Little Sandusky River, Ohio. My people were relocated by treaty of Little Sandusky in 1831 to Indian Territory, which in those days was everything west of what we call the Mississippi River. We were to go to northeast Oklahoma with a 65,000 acre reserve that had been set up in exchange for our lands along Lake Erie. When they got there, it wasn't there. They had been lied to. And this happened continuously. It took them many years before they were able to get a livable place to live, only until after the Civil War. The reason why I give you my background is that it is customary, usually for an American Indian, to identify his people and his lineage, giving him authority to speak of his people, not of another Indian tribe. This is just being courteous to our people and to who we address. Hopefully that you would know that we are meaningful in character and knowledge and have no malicious or sneaky way about us. We're just talking about who we are, what we are, and we entertain all questions about everything. On a side note, the term Oklahoma comes from a Creek word, Creek Indian word, who lived in Georgia and South Carolina. It means blood earth. And the Creeks were the first ones relocated in 1813. And they were relocated to what they call blood earth, which term is now Oklahoma. So you can see there's a deep, deep history there. And it's sad, but we did the best we could. I am looking at questions, hopefully from the audience, about why does or do American Indians, men and women, join the armed forces of the United States and have done so since the Revolution. We may talk a little bit about pre-Revolution America and the Indians' choices of partnering with foreign powers such as France and England, Spain, and so forth. If anybody has questions about that, that's fine. As Mike stated, we want to talk a bit about code talkers. And I met code talkers in my role in Washington State as a chaplain for the Intertribal Warrior Society Honor Guard. And we were accustomed to hosting Indian people, veterans and so forth, in various venues, Indian venues in Washington and Oregon. Code talkers were people, I'm sure that you understand. There were probably 95% men, but there were some women code talkers, and very, very well respected. Would use their own language to translate English commands, military commands, important vital military information to different subordinate units or higher units for decision making. The best count that I could find of the number of code talkers in terms of tribal identity was that there was at least 62 separate Indian tribes who sent representatives of their people to become code talkers in their language. The Navajo were primary World War II code talkers for the Pacific Ocean. For the European campaign, which began in earnest in the Normandy invasion and the march to Berlin to end the war, had approximately 17 to 18, possibly more. Those figures are guesses, not really hard, but they're general in scope. World War I saw the first code talkers formally in the government as soldiers. There had been code talkers in many different venues prior to that, some going as far back as pre-Civil War, but they weren't, of course, by electronic means. They employed Indians to send signals by smoke from higher elevations, because Indians could send basic commands by smoke, and they did. One example of that is right here in Cahokia, on top of Monk's Mound. They could, and they did, communicate by smoke signals or the use of glass, or in some cases, obsidian reflective devices to send messages from hilltop to hilltop, high elevation to high elevation. All the way far west is Spiral, Oklahoma, and as far north as Racine, Wisconsin, or down the Mississippi River, and into the southeast to Vicksburg and to the Carolinas. So code talkers have a bit of a history. Now, I'm not going to talk about code talkers a whole lot because it's another topic I wanted to discuss with you, with your assistance in providing questions. But basically what code talkers were is quite active in World War I. One of them won a Medal of Honor in 1918, a young man by the name of Albert Grass. He was a Lakota. Lakota were very, very much involved as code talkers in World War I, both Europe and in the Asian campaign, Pacific Ocean. He was killed in combat in an area in France called the Soissons-Paris Road. And for his behavior in battle, aside from being a code talker, he won the Medal of Honor. And I believe he was the first one to do so. And the code talkers were successful in World War I, but they weren't publicized very much and so forth. But they returned to their home peoples proud of what they had done as soldiers, helping other soldiers of the United States and of their own people by doing something as meaningful as being trusted to use classified means of communication to pass critical, vital information to command for operational orders to lower echelon. This involved a great deal of responsibility for the code talkers in terms of accuracy, of coding and decoding, and the protection of that information. And it was very difficult sometimes to protect information. You could code, decode, but usually you had to write it on pieces of paper and so forth, and you didn't want any of that to fall into the enemy's hands. And I think they did a fine job. Most code talkers were located at higher echelon levels of command to be accessed by commanders for creating communications, vital communications to their command, to lower command. Occasionally, I won't say occasionally, that's not a good term. At times, code talkers would be found down as low as company level, depending upon the mission and so on. World War II saw immediate use of code talkers, both through the Pacific Command, primarily in the Pacific by Navajo people who had over 400 code talkers involved in their part of the war, and a couple hundred more who were in the European campaign. Interestingly enough, there were other code talkers from other countries that were involved in World War II. Very few, but they were involved using. Our allies had code talkers as well, denying information to the German forces. Mike has pointed out something very beautiful in our history of code talkers, is that they were involved in a meaningful way in victory in Europe. They started out in numbers. I believe that the original group that landed on Omaha, south of Pointe du Hoc, were Comanche. I say Comanche in their language, Comanches here in English. They immediately began working as code talkers, and within a matter of months, they had worked their way up with invading Americans and English and French forces. And they're among the very first of troops to enter into Berlin, therefore causing the capitulation of the German government. The effect of the code talkers was enormous, very beneficial. They suffered casualties, but being basically rear echelon in Europe, they didn't have too many per ratio of unit. But what they did is they sacrificed themselves in time and effort. On the negative part, there was a lot of prejudice by American forces that they had Indians working with classified information that affected their movements and contributed to their military successes. And, but that was just the way it was. My father was a radio technician. He didn't serve in armed forces. He served as a government technician with equipment that the code talkers used. He was an early graduate of Western Electric in Chicago, their radio technological school. He was a full-blood Indian, but he had good grades and so forth. He had a father who had influence. And he supported the effort in Germany, or Europe rather, from New Hampshire. I didn't know this. My mother divorced him when I was 5, but I met him occasionally. In 1987, he came to visit me and my family in Washington State. And during a conversation, he asked me some of the questions about what I had done in my later years in military service. And I told him. And then he told me, he said, I worked in classified information. I said, where? He said, in New Hampshire. I said, that is a research classified, highly, the location has always been for, not secret warfare per se, but for modern development and control and so forth, for all the services. And I said, did you support the code talkers? He said, I can't tell you. I was sworn to secrecy. Well, that's the same thing that all code talkers would say, right? He knew. I could see it in his eyes. What the hell am I getting questioned for? The young squeaker. And I kind of lost my train of thought. I do every time I tell that story. Code talkers were sworn to secrecy. The first code talker group that was allowed to speak of some of their classified interaction with the war effort were Navajo. Unfortunately, some Navajo decided to take advantage of notoriety and make some money out of it. And they began divulging classified information, which earned the disrespect of other tribes. Unfortunately, to this day, if one says, how about Navajo code talkers? They'll say they're traitors by American Indians. And that's really unfortunate because I met them while I was a member of the Intertribal Warrior Society Honor Guard of the Muckleshoot. We did have occasion to do honor ceremonies for Navajo code talkers who were invited to the state of Washington by the Indians for specific ceremonies and things. And they're all good men, and they're tarnished by the actions of a few. I'm kind of wandering a bit here, and I'm not going to say that because of code talkers, the United States won World War II in Pacific and Europe. However, they definitely lent to a reduction of casualties, which many American families, I'm sure, are very grateful if they knew that their son's life was maintained, assured by Indian code talkers. That would probably put a little bit of a boost in our column. But Mike, do you have anything you want me to talk about?
Well, I just want to, one thing on the code talkers, as Warren and I kind of alluded to, the radio man that we had first cast and did the scanning for, is that the first piece of equipment that they sent back to us to look at digitally and so forth was the radio. And the radio that we used was from a reenactor in Bethalto who had an actual World War II radio that was used. So that came back and it looked absolutely gorgeous in the models. You could rotate it and everything on the screen, so that's being produced. And so the statues are working and they're going. But no, the code talkers that Warren went and talked about, obviously they did great wonders. And they were, when I was on Omaha Beach, my wife and I we went 3 times to the Omaha Beach for the D-Day. And on the 70th and the 75th, on the 70th, I was honored to give a speech on Omaha Beach on D-Day to the Bedford Association. And from there, then we went from D-Day to see on the 75th, they just had a brand new monument put in place, and it was for the Native Americans, their participation in the D-Day Omaha Beach landings. And we went over there to it, and I think Warren will tell you, but their monument is a turtle. which is very sacred in the Indian and Native American population. So we went to there, we saw that. 1st Infantry Division had that on the beach, and it was absolutely wonderful to see all the flowers and the memorials that were put down on there. So, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. I have personal experience in my family, not with code talkers, but with American Indians and the battles in Europe. I have 2 uncles who served in Europe. One uncle lived in Chicago. That's where my family comes from originally, Chicago. He went to Canada after the breakout of hostilities and volunteered for the Canadian Air Force. He was trained as a fighter pilot, sent to England. He fought through the Battle of England, the air war between the Germans and the English. He was there in the air over Omaha Beach the day of the invasion. Close air support in the P-51 fighter. He was in the plane for 14 hours. He returned once to England for refueling, then came back. He didn't return until night, very hazardous landing. He was so tired he could not extract himself from the cockpit. He had to be pulled out. He won 3 what they call the DSCs.
Distinguished Service Cross.
Yeah, the Descendant Service Cross for his work. He was there for almost 3 years in England. I had a meeting with him in 1987, and it was because I was 100% PTSD, combat-related disability from Vietnam. And I was instructed if I had any family members who had been in combat to talk to them about it. And I remembered him and I found him. He told me that his entire life had been changed by World War II. That the amount of contact he had with the enemy was such that he left the Air Force as a major at 15 years because the jets that were coming on board in the Air Force as a primary propeller aircraft are being downgraded and gone. He said because the jets would be much more capable of killing more people, he couldn't go back, enemy or not. He's written a book about his feelings and so forth, of being strafing troop trains and watching the German soldiers run and him flying over top of them, machine gunning them down, watching them die. That's the cost. That's an American Indian experience in a war that was fought by Western and Eastern forces. There was something, I had another uncle who was a combat engineer, came out a few days after the landing with an American unit and fought through the war and disappeared for 2 weeks, hiding out from the enemy because his unit had been destroyed by the Germans. And he never recovered. He was always a very quiet man. So it's, we suffer the same tragedies as everybody else in the military. We gave it our all. And as we know from Mike, a beautiful statement about the National Memorial for Military Ascent is that it honors the sacrifice, the courage of all veterans, of all wars, of all experiences, not just the ones in fighting, but the ones who supported them. And in turn, those who gave it all, or came home grievously wounded, or didn't come home at all, their families. Honor the families as much as we can, because they were the ones that did not know what was going to happen to their loved ones. I speak from experience about this. As the chaplain for the Intertribal Warrior Society, Honor Guard, Muckleshoot Tribe, we supported the National Cemetery, Veterans Cemetery in Covington, Washington, outside DC, or Seattle. During my tenure as the chaplain, we performed the Honor Guard services for burials. I officiated at over 2,500 veteran funerals. And during those long years, I met the families of over 2,500 veterans. And that was always a theme that I would hear from time to time. He's at peace, and now we're at peace. Profound, 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 that their youth, men and women who joined the military, weren't the only ones that were there. Their parents and loved ones were there in spirit. So I just want to put that out.
Do we have any questions for Warren before we move on the end down here?
The movie that was made a few years ago, that I believe was called Wind Talkers, about the code talkers. Were the Navajo the technical advisors for that? How accurate was it? And what did the other Indian tribes think about it?
Okay, Mike, let me have that.
Did you see the movie The Code Talkers that was
Wind
made?
Talkers.
Wind Talkers with Nicolas Cage?
Yes.
Okay, he wanted to know how accurate it was, and the Navajo were the advisors.
I think it was generally accurate. You know, of course, Hollywood, being a moneymaker, want to, you know, emphasize some of the points. There's a lot of unrealism, non-realistic behavior, but I don't think it doesn't detract from the message that there was a group of men who were giving it them all. And most of the Indian people, especially the Navajo people, they joined in big numbers, I believe over 400, and they came from very poor areas in Navajo land, which is the largest Indian tribe in the country, both population and geographically. And they joined the military trying to escape the poverty trap, so to speak, and also gain honor, you know, as a soldier, and earn their eagle feathers that way. But they did what they could with what they had. So that doesn't diminish at all what movies do and so forth, or they weren't over heroic, they were very reasonable, but they also saved a lot of lives, and they shortened a very dangerous island hopping war. Technically, it was a very difficult war to fight, island by island.
For the most part, were the Indian tribes proud of the way the movie turned out?
Were they proud of the way the movie turned out, the Indians?
Say that again?
Were the Indians proud of the way the movie turned out?
No, I don't think so. No, I mean, it's, and we don't pay attention to that. I remember Tony Curtis played a role in a movie of Ira Hayes, a Pima Indian, who helped raise the flag, Marines,
Yeah.
raise the flag in Mount Suribachi on the island of Iwo Jima in defiance of the Japanese occupation of the island. He said, the Marines are here, American flag's going up. He joined the Army as kind of a middle-class Pima Indian, and he did his part. He's a damn good Marine, and they contributed greatly to the victory at Iwo Jima by the courage that they displayed. The Marines saw the American flag flying on Mount Suribachi, a high elevation point, and they said, we're here, we're not leaving. They fought hard, and they won. The movie of Ira Hayes, like I said, Tony Curtis played it. They played the role is that he became a drunk while trying to sell American war bonds, and he just lost his way. And he died in a puddle on the Pima Reservation in Arizona, drunk, late night, and I was there at the Indian community at Ototo south of Phoenix. That's where they host the Ira Hayes Days, a 3-day celebration of Ira Hayes, commemorating his contribution to American Indians, their reputation in World War II, and so forth. I was with, again, the Intertribal Warrior Society at the time, and we were doing honor guard. And I was looking at a display in a tent there before we started the formal ceremonies, looking at some of the information on him, and like his life history and his family and all that. And a little old Indian lady came up to me, and she looked at me and she said, do you know what you're reading? And I said, well, I'm reading the history of Ira Hayes here, you know, as a young man and so forth, and his tragic death. He said he didn't drown on that highway. He was beaten to death with a stone by his brother for being in the Marines and disgracing the Marines by becoming a drunk. That's true life. This little old lady, I want you to know that, because you're an honorable person coming here to respect him. But there is the whole story. They're human beings, basically human beings. There's a
Question in the back? Yes.
I understand that regardless of which tribe was involved, there were no terms in their language for military items like a tank or a howitzer or whatever, so they had to kind of invent their own terms for that. Can you elaborate on that?
The Indian language didn't have the terms for tank, artillery, so they had
True.
to reinvent that. Is that true?
But certainly, they coded and decoded, and words like submarine and tank. A tank was turtle, iron turtle. I can't remember a submarine, but they made it clear enough to anybody who's an English speaker to know what they're talking about, because they would tie the word in with the operation, what was going on, and so forth. And, yeah. But they did quite well with that. But I haven't explained to you what I did in the military. I joined in 1959, 18 years old. I went to Duchesne High School in St. Charles, and I wanted to get out of town, and I did. And I was trained in signal, comm center specialist. Then I went into intelligence and walked the hills in Vietnam with an infantry unit and got a body count. I was an interrogator of enemy of war and anybody else who appeared to be an enemy of us. But I do have ideas or concepts of command and so forth, because I work with commanders. And we keep everything as simple as possible. There wasn't any need for eloquent translations. We called it what it was. And if you lived in the military, that you understand, we're pretty simple-minded people. It's mission accomplishment. No fancy stuff. You follow your orders and you get it done. I said, that we did. Is that what we did? That's what we did. That's what Colonel Mike says. That's what we did. That's classified, by the way. Okay. Thank you.
Please.
Can you explain the mechanics of how code talking worked? So if you had, like on D-Day, if you had someone on the beach, where would the code talker have been? Were there code talkers on the beach, and then where would the other code talker have been?
For example, on Omaha Beach, what were the mechanics? How did it work? Was there a code talker on the beach? Was there one on a ship? And were they directing artillery, that type of thing?
Many of the command and control units were shipborne. Some were airborne periodically, depending upon the situation. In the early part of the invasion of early months, they couldn't set up on the mainland because the German forces could possibly attack them. And they had to preserve your commanders, you know. As the war developed, more successful, in other words, more Allied forces arrived, then there was more code talkers coming in. And of course, they were assigned to military units and they followed through and so on. But have to understand that in the military, in the old days, the Signal Corps, which they belonged to, later became the Intelligence Corps. Okay. It evolved into a higher level of technology and became its own entity. But essentially, the protection of documents and classified information was the same. You die to protect your information. You know, I know there's a practice by some people not to adhere to that, but on the other hand, it was very, very, very sensitive, important responsibility to protect that information, and where protection directed you to go, you went there. There was some airborne code talkers in the Pacific Ocean who were communicating by B-52 bomb, not B-52, but whatever, B-17 bombers and 24, like a little mini air command center. And that happened, primarily because there wasn't a room enough on islands that are being battled over. Did that answer your question? Okay.
I've got a question for you, Warren. Well, I have a question for Warren, and one of those is, Warren, can you tell us a little bit why the American Indian has volunteered to go into the military, especially seeing the way the tribes were treated, the Trail of Tears and the relocations and so forth? I think you'll find out that there's a high number that have gone into the military service.
Thank you, Mike. That's an excellent question. American Indians have been enemies or friends of the American government since the Revolution. The last time they were enemies of the American Revolution, the American Republic, was during the Confederacy, when they fought on behalf of the English, as well as in the War of 1812, primarily because in the southeast part of the United States, there remained still strong British financial interests in spite of having given up the United States or American colonies becoming independent. The reason why is that they worked for the British in states like the North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, northern Florida on plantations. They were landowners. The cotton and the tobacco were major crops, which were sent to Europe to be sold. So there was some American Indian tribes who supported enemies of the United States during the War of 1812 with the British and the Civil War between the North and the South. Overall, however, the American Indians have supported the government of the United States. There's a lot of different reasons why. A comical one is an Indian code talker was getting very old. He had been in France as a code talker. Was asked, why did American Indians support the United States after all they did? They stole the land, they poisoned the water, they killed the kids, all that, on and on and on. He says, we weren't thinking about that. It's just that we preferred Mr. Roosevelt to Mr. Hitler. Well, think about it. That's security. I mean, you're protecting your homeland, your people, your family. If lesser of evils, the friend of your enemy is blah, 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 you all hear that. Another reason why is that at the hard-fought situations where Indians survived long enough in specific areas that a treaty was developed and signed, if they did not support the US government and agreed to conscription and so forth or volunteered, they were considered to be not enthusiastic supporters of the government of the United States or enemies, of however you want to view it, which meant that the federal government, through the Congress, could declare Indians of that particular tribe or region enemies of the United States and abrogate the treaties that had been hard fought for. And the Indians would lose everything. And they've been fighting for a couple hundred years, and they weren't about to go through that. On the other hand, in most Indian cultures, being a warrior didn't have a whole lot to do with loyalty to a tribe or political entity. It had to do with your relationship with your spirit and your creator. And warriors gave up themselves for elementals, which is family, ancestors, history, their clan, not a government, but the people. There's a saying in, American Indians like you hear about powwows and Indians dancing and so forth. Well, that dancing may look fancy, but it's not. It's based on one principle. We dance for the people, for our history. When you hear the drums at a powwow or any celebration that Indians have, you'll never hear a love song. I don't even know if there ever has been an Indian love song. They're prayers. Honest to God, deep-hearted prayers. And they're formulated on one basic, fundamental order of the universe for Indians, is that we do the best we can, not for a reward, but because we're supposed to. We're not supposed to get paid for doing what we're supposed to do for creation. A simple way of saying it is we do our very best good in common heart and common mind for and with all of creation. That's what's given us our strength as a people. And that's pretty universal in Indian country. So thank you for the question. I enjoyed it.
You did a good answer. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Oh, boy.
Are you familiar with Bletchley Park?
Familiar with Fledgley Park?
No, Bletchley.
Oh, Bletchley Park?
Outside of London,
Outside of London.
where the British worked to break the German code. I'm just wondering if you knew anything, if there was any
Where the-
coordination between
Where
the
the
code
British
talkers
broke
and the British.
the German code, did they have code talkers over there, do you know?
Yeah.
There's been several partial breakthroughs of the code on both sides, and I know just very little about it. I was a crypto custodian for a number of years, so I got to learn a little bit about that. Much of what was broken was what we call bait by the Germans to see what the English reaction would be by giving them a code they could break and feeding misinformation. That was part of the puzzle. That's the enigma. Right, yeah, the enigma.
Fascinating place to visit.
Yeah, and I doubt if we'll ever have a clearer understanding of exactly how all that worked, but it is. Let's pass misinformation and disinformation to the enemy in any way we can, so they take the bait, okay?
Okay. Was there another question? Yes, ma'am.
How old was you when you went into the service, and how long was you in Vietnam?
How old were you when you went into service, and how long were you in Vietnam?
Thank you for the question. I was 18 years old when I went into the service. I was bound and determined to graduate from high school. I went to a Catholic high school. They have to pay tuition. My stepfather refused to pay tuition after I was a sophomore, so I ended up washing dishes at night for the last couple of years in high school. I was tired, so I went into the Army. Well, sometimes you don't do nothing in the Army except trying, and that's a joke. But anyway.
How long were you in Vietnam?
I was in Vietnam for 2 years. I deployed to Vietnam with the 25th Infantry Division out of Schofield Barracks on Oahu, Hawaii. I was with the 25th Military Intelligence Team as an interrogator prisoner of war. My language that I was using was Special Warfare Chinese Mandarin. I'd been given a special assignment to include immersion in Taiwan, Republic of China. I was assigned to a military advisory assistance group and lived on the economy for a while until I also had formal classroom training too, but the immersion gave me the ability to speak with Chinese. Although today if people say, do you speak Chinese? And I say, what guandola? Means forgot it all. I can't speak it anymore. All right. 2 years, and I volunteered in the unit that I was with, the 3rd Brigade Task Force, MI team, to be detailed out to an infantry unit because my Indian blood said I want to be where the war's at. I didn't want anything to do with the rear command and so forth. So I got my wish and I was detailed to the 1st 14th Infantry Battalion, which incidentally is the Golden Dragons Battalion for their effort in the Boxer Rebellion in China, 1904. When you've ever heard the term, I'll try, sir, that was given a command by a 14th Regiment officer to a GI of the 14th, the young soldier, to climb the walls of the, I guess you would call it not a castle, but the fortress of the Chinese government, and put the American flag, replace the Chinese flag, the Chinese dynasty flag. He did that. And when he was given the order, he said, "I'll try, sir," and that was our motto. Also, the other motto that we used was to the right of the line. That was given to our unit as a 14th Infantry Regiment by President Lincoln after the Civil War for the heroic efforts of that unit in helping win the war. They were given the right to be the lead of the honor parades of the victory celebration in Washington, D.C. And all their forces, all their men were to the right of the line, so to speak, as they went by the review stand, and they were saluted by the president. That's real. They also were at Little Bighorn, one of the infantry units, I think the 5th of the 7th, which became part of the 1st Cav, and the 1st 14th Infantry Regiment at the time. And they were hurt real bad at the Little Bighorn. They also were at Wounded Knee Massacre. So you see, greatness in the country, honors and so forth, and then horrible massacres of an indigenous people that were armed with primitive weapons, you know. So there's a lot of ways of looking at this. It's never easy. There are no clear answers. I will say that American Indians, almost to the man, and I know a lot of them, treasure their experience in the U.S. military. Treasure it. And they treasure, their families treasure it. And their membership in the military is honored for generations. We keep a very close tab, genealogically speaking, of who served in what war. I had an uncle in the Civil War, you know, on the northern side. And there was a lot of pride about that, as well as pride, Indian pride in the code talkers. Tremendous amount of pride. Even though all the code talkers are dead, every tribe has a tribal veterans association or membership or whatever. And the families continue to be honored, the code talker families. And the stories are continuously told about the code talkers' experiences. So it's real to us. We love our country. We love the land that was here before the colonialists came. And we survived it. And you've heard the term, "we shall remain." You're damn right we will. But we love this country and we can't fight it. It's ours. Creator, he set it up this way, you know? Okay, I don't want to get gushy about this.
And I'd just like to add to that Warren came into the military, I'll get him, in 1959 and retired in 1980 as a chief warrant officer. For his service in Vietnam, he was awarded the Bronze Star, the Combat Infantry Medal with the 24th Infantry Division for his actions in combat.
My last year in Vietnam, I like to do that. I was there in 72.
72, okay, yeah.
Forgive me, I didn't answer the question fully. I returned to Vietnam in 1972, January. The agreement to end hostilities in the Vietnams, authored by Henry Kissinger at the peace talks in Paris, went into effect 2 weeks after I left. I was assigned to Saigon. The vast majority of American forces had withdrawn. The country was lost. The war was gone. The North Vietnamese were just hanging back, waiting for the final treaty to come in, and then they would take more and more control, and finally they would dominate the country. My work in 1972, I had had 47 weeks of Saigon Vietnamese training at the Defense Language Institute at the El Paso School, and then I went directly to Vietnam and I worked as NCOIC operations for the Combined Military Interrogation Center in Saigon. We're a joint force exploitation of the enemy center. And we were busy. By June, or July rather, we were given orders to disband. We no longer would exploit the enemy. We never had weapons. Our weapons were taken away from us right after I arrived in early '72. I was reassigned to J2 MACV, Strategic Research Analysis Division. And my job was to support the colonel who was in charge of that. White House papers for the war room of the U.S. military, the estimates branch, the Corps evaluation system, the Phoenix system, Hamlet evaluation system, the Foreign Area Specialist program, and several other programs. All of this is being analyzed by the RAND Corporation and so on. The highest level you could go for intelligence, okay? Went there in July. By September, me and several other guys were burning safe loads of classified information at the end of Townsend Airstrip with thermite plates, burning and destroying. What we couldn't destroy by classification, we took to the American consulate in boxes. American consulate didn't know what to do with it because they didn't have room for highly classified information. So they stored it somewhere. We think the North Vietnamese eventually got it all when they conquered Saigon. It was bizarre. I had went there by emergency airlift on a C-141 Starlifter, New Year's Eve of 1965. We had to go real quick. 25th was called because we were afraid the Chinese were going to come in and cut the country in half. Several years later, I'm burning classified information, basically giving up, the war was over. There were Vietnamese women on street corners who had American kids. They were screaming, "Take my child, take my child." It was horrifying. It was just horrifying. But we did what we could do. We did what we thought was lawful orders of our country. We didn't criticize the country. We fought as soldiers. This is what our oath was. And there was no difference who you were, if you had been from Cuba, if you're Mexican, a veteran, an American Indian veteran, or anything. We did our job. So again, thank you for the questions. They're deep.
All right, before we wrap up, any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Were there any Native American women that were code talkers?
Native American women code talkers.
There were some, okay, very few. But then there were very few American Indians went into the military because you had to stay home and take care of the kids and so forth, But there were some, and they were basically well used, I'm sure, and well respected. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, the last question probably burning everybody's thought right now is, how did Warren and I get together? This is like the odd couple, right? How did you and I join together? How did we link up? Well, last year, there's an organization called the MRCTI, and it's comprised of 103 mayors up and down the Mississippi River. And in order to be in the organization, your city or your town has to be on the river. So we had a meeting that last year. They have a meeting every year, and this one was going to be up in Minnesota at the headwaters of the Mississippi. So I drove up there, and I remember one night we're having this big meetings all day, and you know how this goes, everybody's windy and whatnot, and I'm hungry. It's getting to be dinner time. So I came out of the room, and I'm making a beeline down to where the dinner's going to be held, and there's somebody blocking my path as I'm heading. And he's kind of going slow, and he's got his Native American garb, because we were at a Native American reservation up there. We had a lot of interactions and so forth. And I was getting ready to make this fast beeline around him, and a little voice told me, they said, don't buzz around him, stop and say hi. So I slowed down, and I remember I turned to you and I said, hi, how you doing? He said, hi, how you doing, and that. And then we got to talking. And we spent, I don't know how many hours together that night. We had dinner, we sat and we chatted and we talked about the memorial, what we're doing with it and everything, and he was so excited about it. And I asked him that night, I said, would you consider being our chaplain? We need I was overwhelmed when he said yes. And so we've been together, joined at the hip ever since. He is the chaplain for the National Memorial Military Ascent. He's got a bio that he doesn't like me to read because it's 2 pages long, as far as all of the things that he has done, not just in the military, but for the Native American communities, for the Indians, and for all of everything else, and for the work that he's done for PTSD and everything else. He's just a wonderful man, and we are blessed to have him as our chaplain of this organization. Now, he's going to be here for 2 weeks. We've got tomorrow morning, Warren and I are going to be on the Big Z radio, and then before that, we're going down to the Riverbender for an interview. We've got a dinner Thursday night with the regional mayors of the Southwest Illinois, where they'll be up in Grafton. We're hosting it. And there's going to be it's usually a big group get in, and he's going to give a presentation down there that night on the Cone Talkers. And we have 2 or 3 events every day that are lined up while we're here. So please, if chat with him afterwards if you want as we go, but we're just grateful to have him here, and we're taking good advantage of him while he is here. So Warren, thank you, and we'll say goodnight.
Okay, thank you. I have one final comment.
Please, go. Yeah.
If you don't mind, thank you very much, Mike. And there's more to that story than that, but he does have a reputation to protect, and he was really barreling down the road to get to that chow line, but
I was hungry.
I was hungry, yeah. And I was in no way. But it's so fortunate to come together as 2 soldiers out of nowhere, didn't have the slightest idea who each other was, and become brothers instantly. It's beautiful. I love it. I want to say this.
What's the stuff that you take to the wall?
That's the national.
The memorial?
That's the memorial we're building in Grafton.
Okay,
Thank you.
Okay. Several months ago, I became an award winner for the Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. Beloved Community Award, State of Washington, for what I've done for social services, American Indian, and blah, 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 blah. Okay, so it was a great honor. Live in Mexico, and so I asked if I could accept it by Zoom. They agreed. And said, hey, super. So I'm sitting there and listen to the little ceremony and the award and this and that, and my picture is up on the screen, and they say, Warren, do you have any comments? And I said, yes, please, indulge me. I do have a comment. You're the leaders, senior leaders of the state of Washington, Department of Social Health Services and so forth, and the governor was there and he had signed it and blah, blah, blah. I said, you have authority. Our country is in such terrible shape today that our children may not be able to have a future. Our inaction or our misaction and so on, not coming together in common heart and common mind, very likely is going to steal the future of our kids. Would you please get out there and do your job and start helping everybody? Yeah? Truthfully, and I said, I must have blown this pretty bad. And when I concluded speaking, there was a little bit of a silence. They all stood up and they cheered. I believe to my heart that our country is a damn good country. Okay. I believe that we have a lot of real fine people in our country, and we are not going to let us self-destroy this beautiful structure of man's gift to man. So, in my language, I'm going to say this, Seneca, for being here. I say, Nyawedoa, great thanks. And I say, Nya, wen hashkanon. Peace and gratitude to all of you.